Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us for this CPD session. Today we are doing TPR, Theology, Philosophy and Religion, and we are absolutely delighted to welcome the Reverend Michael Wilcockson. He is not only our lead setter for TPR and formerly at Eton College, but I have to say from experience, a wonderful speaker and a hugely inspiring teacher. The aim of these sessions is to support you delivering the new specifications for CE and also coping with the changeover from the old syllabuses as well. But this session today is focusing on revision strategies for TPR. Our aim at ICB is to continually evolve the assessments that we have and also to help demonstrate to you how CE can also support cross-curricular and thematic learning. So in our next session, Michael's going to be exploring EDI and philosophers from outside of the spec, with a particular focus on feminist philosophy and issues of gender, which we know are really important and pertinent in our teaching at the moment. He's also going to have a quick look in our next session at planning second year teaching. So make sure you sign up on Eventbrite for that next session. That's going to be on the 14th of June, and there's currently an early bird discount too. So if you guys, once you've done this session tonight, if you want to get on and book that one too, it would be lovely to see you again. Also a reminder that for the first time ever, ISEB now has social media channels. So on all channels, if you go to @ISEB Awards, you will be able to find us and become our friend there too. Once Michael's session's finished, we are going to have time for questions. So please use the chat function in YouTube. If you aren't logged into Google or YouTube already, then do log in, because that's what's going to give you access to the chat function if you can't see it at the moment. I'll keep making a note of your questions and ensure they're all answered in our Q&A later for you. So without much further ado, tonight for revision strategies in TPR, I am delighted to introduce you to the Reverend Michael Wilcockson.
Thank you, Julia. Just waiting for presentation to come up. And here we are. Well, I don't know how you all feel about revision. Is it the one that excites you when you come up to before the exam? Or is it one you feel with a certain degree of dread? And the dread, in a way, is because you feel like you're going over old material all over again. But I'm going to suggest to you, actually, that revision is, from my own experience as a teacher, is not only a way of consolidating, but go over some things you might have missed out the first time, but actually is a chance to do what, in a way, the specification is all about. So let's remind ourselves of the ICB Aims, because what we have here in a nutshell is what we hope TPR in particular, but all ICB specifications are aiming to do. So looking at these, use them as qualities to think, well, how am I going to do my revision? For instance, to provide a sense of adventure, to secure those foundations. And if anything was going to summarize revision, it is to secure the foundations, not only of knowledge, but of those important skills. And then I always thought when I came to do revision, we needed some new things to provide that sense of curiosity. What haven't we done before that we can now redo? Perhaps you skimmed over it the first time or even possibly left it out. It's nice to have one or two things up one's sleeve to reintroduce or introduce in revision. And of course, the all-important ones is of confidence. There's something quite satisfying as one revises of seeing one's pupils have that confidence to deal with materials that they didn't quite understand the first time round. And of course, the main skills of knowledge, understanding, and what is crucial to TPR, critical thinking skills. And this all adds up to lifelong learning. So whatever you're doing, and I say this as a former senior school teacher, that you're laying down at the junior end these really important skills which are picked up not only at GCSE a few years later and at A-level, but certainly beyond. Okay, now at the beginning of the spec, and it's worth going back over these, are the TPR aims. These are ones which are quite specific. So let's have a think about those very quickly. First of all, there are simply those critical skills which you need to develop to not only answer questions, but I'm sure you still find, and this is still important at revision level, of those foundational questions to life. Is there any other subject that does it in quite the same way and quite so uniquely as TPR? Others may claim it, but I defy them to do it as critically and as informatively as TPR. There are important, actually really important textual skills, those biblical skills if you're doing that particular section, but if you're not, even so, reading passages, being able to develop them, to be able to deal with them critically is really important. And then there are philosophical skills, which, again, you may not be teaching that element, but can I suggest to you that those philosophical skills of argument, of analysis, of insight, and ability to evaluate are true for all aspects of the TPR course. And then we want to be able to build up our knowledge and understanding of key beliefs, of values, either in one or more religions. And finally, to consider the influence of beliefs associated with those particular religions. Now, I'm saying all this because I think it's important for you to go back and look at the beginning of the specification and to remind yourselves of what the foundations are, because that will help you in developing your particular revision strategies. Okay, so let's now move on to the actual strategy itself. If I say things that you already know, well, that's good. And sometimes it's good for me just to reiterate how we've put the specification together, and that will help you, I think, in your revision strategies. So to remind you, you're going to be, and I hope you've taught this, you're teaching 2 out of the possible 3 sections. And each section is divided into 2, topic 1 and topic 2. And there are 2 questions set on the exam paper in each topic. Therefore, that gives your pupils 4 questions in total, of which they have to, of course, as you know, answer 1 from section 1 and another from either whatever section you're choosing. So 2 questions from any 2 sections. Topic 1 tend to be more abstract. Now, it's hard to know. Sometimes I don't know your children particularly, of course, but it may be that some are very good at thinking abstractly, but not very good at writing on it, and vice versa. And topic 2 tend to be more grounded in terms of religion and practice and ceremonies, in the philosophy on the nature of ethics and human nature, and in the theology on sort of simply responses to the divine or to God. If you're strapped for time, then my advice to you is that you just don't teach or revise, rather, either topic 1 or 2. And that might help you in saying, look, that reduces your opportunity, your choice of questions. However, by reducing it right down, it's probably more than likely you're going to cover that in your revision process. It's possible also, and we thought about this in the religions, is just to choose 1 topic from one religion, topic 1 from one religion, and another topic 1 or another topic 2 from another religion. So you could teach 2 religions and just teach half the course for each one. So let's remind ourselves, we have an examination of 60 minutes long. It's not a long time, and I know some schools tell me they just don't have time to get through it all, but we're going to come on to how we structure our questions time-wise. So I've put here, of course, what I just said. You've got 2 questions per topic in each section. Questions, as you know, are divided into A to C. That's essentially knowledge, understanding, and evaluation. And 1 question to be answered from each section. So that gives you half an hour for each question. Now, here's some suggestions from me. I mean, I don't know what you've particularly said to your own pupils, but here's some thoughts for timings. And the timings I'm suggesting, if they spend longer than that, they've probably written too much or they've simply wandered off what they're supposed to do. I think 6 minutes is ample time to do a part A question. It's just about knowledge. It does not need to be beautiful. We're not asking for elegant English at this point. And sometimes ask whether it would matter if, for instance, an answer was bullet pointed. Well, as a senior school teacher, I'd rather it was written in sentences. But, you know, if you're short for time and your pupil is not brilliant at doing it, well, a few bulleted points is enough, actually, to give straightforward knowledge. It's probably less appropriate to do knowledge in part B. But what you do need to do for a good answer is to unpack more than one meaning for a particular idea or a particular ceremony or a particular bit of text, if that's what they're being asked to have a look at it. So a good answer, you will see, will develop an idea. And I reckon that probably needs about 10 minutes to answer a part B question. Now, it doesn't always follow that for evaluation, it is one's brighter pupils who do the best answers. And sometimes it's those who are, as it were, less bright but have lots of ideas who do quite well in the evaluation. I'm going to come back to this in a moment's time to discuss structure. But here I've suggested about 12 minutes. That gives you time to think about what the question is, to focus on that. And just to remind your pupils, of course, there are no right and wrong answers. What there are, of course, are better and worse arguments. So let's come on to that in a moment's time. Now, I had a chat to the TPR setting team a few weeks ago, several of whom teach at prep school level. And this was reinforced by senior school teachers as well, on what advice they would give you if they were here with me giving this talk. And here's some of their advice. First of all, know what the command words mean, and we tend to use sort of three. One of which is describe, or sometimes outline. Sometimes we use briefly outline. That means, especially if it's a longish text, rather than saying, give me all the detail, be selective. And that's a skill I'm sure you've been teaching. So know what the command words mean. The second one is usually explain. And that's the key word too. Don't just repeat information, but unpack it and look for meaning and develop the ideas. And you may want to come back to me and say, well, how do we develop ideas? The next point I've made here was one made by one of my teams in particular, and I don't know whether you do this, do you actually give your pupils the relevant sections from the specification? Do they know what the content is? I'm sure very well organised ones have probably gone on the internet and found out, but it's worth actually just giving them what it says in the specification. Now, one or two specific bits of advice on the three areas. Now, you probably already know this, but the setter here wanted me just to remind you that questions 1 and 3, that's going to be one question from the first part and one question from the second, usually are very specific and focus on a specific story or text. And questions 2 and 4 are almost always thematic and generic. Next thing to remind you. One of the setters said to me, just remind those doing the philosophy section that it does require technical knowledge, technical words, specific ideas with philosophy, and you can't get your way through it, and we would say this probably at GCSE and at A-level and beyond, just through common sense. So make sure that they really have some specific philosophical vocabulary. And the religion section, again, if you're studying religion is actually, it sounds obvious to me, is to have some specific examples from that particular religion itself. So that you can go, especially in Part C questions, you can answer specifically that question, but also go beyond it. So Part C questions don't necessarily, you can check this with the question, and you can say it to your pupils, they may ask you a very generalized question, which doesn't need knowledge of that particular religion, but does require some understanding of the ethics and philosophy which surround that religion. Okay. So another thing that came out of our discussion was how much are you relying on other subjects when you come to revision time to give a common script? My own experience was that sometimes when it comes to revision, they're saying, oh, well, in history, we're being taught to do these things in a different kind of way, especially when it comes to evaluation. And I do think, and in fact, my team thinks, that if you discuss it with other subjects or like subjects, there is a great opportunity here for doing some collaborative revision. And in fact, it's a very good way of selling the subject because, again, one of my setters said to me, actually, when English and history and other similar subjects saw what we are doing in terms of evaluation skills in particular, they said, well, actually, TPR does this rather better than we do. So I think that here's an opportunity to do what Common Entrance and ICB would like us to do, is to work across subjects and to really understand how revision time can be used economically and actually in improving our subject skills. So I'm going to now focus on Part C questions because they're probably the ones that, again, at Common Entrance and way beyond, cause the most concern. They are the high order skills. They are the ones in the end which are most satisfactory because it's beginning to train the mind up to think critically, to pull ideas together, and to write what senior schools find extremely helpful is a well-structured essay. Well, you probably can know it by different names. It's either PEEA or P with 3 E's or whatever. I'm not too fussed what you want to call it. But it's essentially doing the following. It's actually just putting together something very straightforward, which is simply an argument. And you can explain to your pupils that it's an important GCSE skill. And what we're looking for here is when we say two sides of an argument, they don't need to be in that sense balanced, although on the page, they probably do need to be approximately the same amount of words used. I mean, if you know what I mean, space on the page. It's really important that the pupils bring in some kind of evidence. I mean, I haven't taught Common Entrance as such, although I have taught down to year 7, but trying to get them at GCSE, for instance, to bring appropriate evidence, it doesn't have to be a great deal of evidence, is really significant. And also to explain your ideas. It's no good just stating an idea, it needs to be explained by teasing it out and almost perhaps getting them to feel that they've almost said the same thing twice. Significantly is to point out the good and bad points. Now, at this level, it may sound a bit clumsy, but actually clumsy is not a bad idea because it flags it up for the examiner. And don't forget, they're going to be probably reading a lot of scripts, and they want those sort of signposts that they really have done what's being asked of them. So here we are, it's point, evidence, explanation, assessment, or if you prefer, evaluation, which are really important. Now, I don't know whether you've come across, I will flag this up a bit later, but there are some teacher resources produced by Hodder, which I've written with Susan Grenfell, and if you haven't already got these, you might find them helpful. And here's particularly one worksheet in the Theology and Philosophy handbook for you, which you might like to photocopy and give to your pupils. So I'd ask them to start off when you're doing a Part C with a brainstorm, to organize those ideas, to select from them. Here's a really important word to stress. It is to be selective. Because it's no point writing down everything you've thought about, but you want to select those main ideas and then to work out what it is you want to argue. That's not so easy, as you probably know if you ever tried it yourself. And by the way, do you ever try and write an exam answer while your pupils are doing them? Perhaps you don't want to, but I strongly suggest you have a go at it. It makes you, if nothing else, sympathetic to what they're trying to do. Make sure they have some of the evaluative phrases, and I put some in. The strength, weakness is obviously one. This does or does not make logical sense. This is or is not persuasive. That's quite a good phrase to use, especially in philosophy essays. This idea works up to a point, but this argument succeeds or fails because. And those are those key words. And if they can use them, if nothing else, it turns it into, from being just straightforward knowledge and understanding, into an evaluative essay. And what I would say is, until you really get to the conclusion, which is vital, then you haven't really made an evaluative statement. So let me illustrate that now to you. By the way, you're going to get all these slides, so do use them in the classroom and adapt them as you think fit. So this is one I've sort of made up for one on religion. Men and women should not sit together when worshipping. Notice it doesn't name this as a specific religion. So it's up to your pupil which religion or religions they would like to choose by way of answering this question. So, for example, even if this was in a Judaism set of questions, it wouldn't stop you particularly answering from Islam if you knew anything about it, or you can just answer it in a very generalized kind of way. So here goes. I'm going to read it out to you. Both Orthodox Jews and Muslims have strict segregation of sexes in religious services so as to prevent men from being distracted by women during prayers. That's the point that's being made. And so far, if you like, it's a kind of hovering between knowledge and understanding. Example coming up. In Orthodox synagogues, women worship in the gallery, and in mosques, women pray behind men. I mean, you could introduce that by saying, for example. Now, here's the explanation. Many would say this is a good thing and should be practiced in all religious services. And key word here, because attention should be on God, not on the people worshipping around you. And here's the assessment. And if you look at it, it is in a sense a kind of mini conclusion. Therefore, that's the key word, as men and women can distract each other, that picks up from an earlier part of the paragraph. It is good for religious buildings to be designed so that men and women worshippers are separated and can concentrate solely on God. So what we've done there in the assessment is we've introduced it by therefore, and we've given a reason why this is something which what this candidate approves of. Now, this is a paragraph against. We're keeping it very simple at this. There's no great virtue by being clever in this. And by the way, I forgot to say, of course, there is no introduction to this question. You don't need at this level, nor, by the way, at GCSE, an introduction. Now, at a higher level, you do, but at this level, you don't. So we start here. On the other hand, don't worry, senior schools say, oh, I can't bear it when I hear people saying, on the other hand. It's clear, it does what's supposed to be done, and we're not aiming to be writing GCSE or A-level questions at this point. On the other hand, families like to worship together. It's a time for standing together as human beings before God, regardless of their sex. That's the point that's being made. Example coming up, all Reform and liberal Jewish synagogues are designed for families to sit together, and many progressive mosques have rejected tradition. Fair enough. Explanation. This is, and here's the key word again, because in the sight of God, men and women are all equal. Furthermore, that's a good phrase to learn, At home, in Judaism and Islam, men and women pray together. So it should be no different in synagogue and mosque. There's a logic there which runs through that sentence, or those couple of sentences. And then the key word, therefore, or it could have said in conclusion, because to the outside world, men and women have equal rights, it's not only very strange to separate the sexes for worship, but morally wrong. And now we come to the all-important, pull it all together. And as I put here in the little box, make sure that you do refer to the essay question. This is vital. In conclusion, I disagree with the statement. That's nice and clear. I think that although both religions have to be true to their traditions, the traditions have to change for the times, and so separating men and women worship is morally and religiously wrong. And there we are. They fully answer the question. And just to remind your pupils when they do this, we should not be bringing in more information at this stage, because you've covered the key information up to that point in making your answers. Okay. Here's one resource, if you haven't already seen it, which you might like to use, or you can just write your own if you wish. What I suggest you do is, if you do use this book, is to read the exam practice questions and answer pages 5 to 8 in the introduction, which is how to interpret the levels of response. I haven't gone through these, but you know what they are. And just to remind you, the levels of response, of course, what pupils need to look at, because they're not referring to facts. There is no set answer in most cases. What's important is the degree to which they achieve those levels. Then thinking about questions. That gives some examples and responses. Lots of illustrations there for you to use from the book. And then I suggest you might like to do the following. You can put pupils into pairs or into little groups. Give them an exam question from the book or one you've made up. They can write their answers and discuss and swap and discuss their merits and demerits. Look at the levels of response and award a mark. And then what is quite fun is to give them an example, your answer or the answer from the book, and see whether they get at a top level. I've done this in the past and found my pupils have strongly thought my answer was not very good. So there you are. But that's a risk you take. But it's a good exercise to do in pulling all this together. And you can do it not only with evaluative questions, of course, but with knowledge and understanding. Now, I thought I'd say something. This goes a little bit off-piste, if you like. But I did say right at the very beginning that revision is also an opportunity for consolidation, having a bit of fun, and moving beyond merely passing the exam. I know that may seem strange. So it may be, in practicing all this, you'd like to go on to do some longer essays. You could do this, of course, at any stage in your course. But you may think, actually, this will reinvigorate the learning process. We have worked with, it should say ISRSA and ICB in an essay competition. The closing date, here you are, you'll have it in your handout when you get it, is the 14th of May. And I'm going to bring questions up, the essays up in a moment. But this time, rather than just doing a paragraph for and against, you simply repeat the process. So go over those earlier slides, show them how it's done, and then you can practice writing a 4-paragraph essay, and of course, important with conclusion. Or you may like to do the IPQ in this, which will be a really good way of consolidating everything and putting it towards perhaps a senior school portfolio. So here are the questions. Note that this year, as opposed to last year for ISRSA, we've actually gone down to year 6. This was a request from a couple of schools. So 2 categories here, years 6 to 7 and years 8 to 9. There are some quite generous book token rewards for good essays and winners and runners-up. So you can see we've used the 3 categories. In the theology here, we've got something on the Red Sea. Philosophy, something on civil disobedience. and on religion, something on rites and ceremonies, and for the years 8 to 9, something on the paralysed man, something on liberty for philosophy, and something on the nature of all religions leading to the same reality of God. So those are the questions we've set for this year, which I'm coordinating, and I shall indeed look at many of those essays, and I have a team which is helping me. So let me now come to the last little part of my presentation this afternoon. 2 other resources, which I'm sure many of you have seen. And don't forget, TPR was revised before the main revisions to other subjects, and we have tweaked the spec a little bit since that time, but it makes no substantial difference to the textbooks. And as I shall say in my next session, we have tweaked a little bit more to allow a bit more open-ended questions in the philosophy section in particular. So you'll see on the left-hand side here some of those teacher resources in these which I referred to earlier on. And here's some of the activities you might like to use from those teacher resources, which will help in the revision process. There's a thing called Time Target, which is to read a biblical text and find key data. There are quick sort of fill in the blanks. There are other ones you can see on the left-hand side here of the worksheet 2, which is to cut out those cards and order them in the right order, for particularly in philosophy on particular philosophers and their life stories, or indeed for biblical stories. There are fill in the gaps, which are often stories or dialogues or about a religious building or story, which they're given a set of words to fill in and to really focus on the text. There are questions on understanding the text. There are various games which you can use. There are discussion cards which they've got to talk to each other and form an argument. A really good one is matching words with definitions, particularly useful in religions, word searches you all know about, and one called Read, React and Respond, which will help them either in pairs or in groups to think about how they might begin to put together that brainstorming bit for evaluative questions. Well, I'm not sure how much I've said which is novel to you. I hope I haven't in a way, but I hope this has pulled together and perhaps got your minds thinking about how you can do revision and, of course, preparing for the exam, but also an opportunity to consolidate what's really important in TPR. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Michael. That was super helpful. I think you're very brave. I can imagine when I was teaching, I did used to try and write essays at the same time as children were, but sharing them, not so brave. Unless, of course, I thought I'd done something particularly brilliant. But no, you're right. We should be brave, and we should be honest with the children that we teach. We were very lucky in that people had sent some inquiries up front, and so if it's all right with you, we would just love to spend some minutes going through those questions and just making sure that everybody's got the information that they need. So I'm just going to start. I'm just having a quick look at these. So the first one is, when students are brilliant at discussing philosophy, but that doesn't translate to their writing, what can I do to help them? It's such a good question.
Well, I wish I had an easy answer to that, because if I did, I'd be selling it rather than telling you. I think to give them the confidence that to jot down the key ideas they've written, and it doesn't matter too much about writing brilliant English, but above all, to keep it simple. Mm-hmm. As one headmaster I had, you said, and the use of the humble full stop. You know what happens when a sentence goes on and on and on, then you lose meaning from that. So I would say write short sentences. Try and get that key idea which they find important, and to get it down on paper. But I'm afraid there's no simple answer to this. It will come with time. But obviously, what you need to do as the teacher is just to give a lot of support and encouragement, and say, well, look, this will develop over time into something really good.
Lovely. And actually, we had another one that was linked to that, which is, and I think you've kind of answered it, but it's, would you advise teaching essay writing structure as we go, sort of as part of our lessons, as this is a written subject? So I think probably to extend that from what you were saying, for me, and I remember when I was teaching an essay-based subject before, pupils would say to me, "Oh, I remember, I remember quite a lot of the information. Can't I just write bullet points?" How can they? Or
well, I suggest you could write bullet points for knowledge answers. I don't see any harm in that particularly. I mean, all I said, you do need to get to know what your senior schools expect, because I have to say some teachers get very sort of huffy about this. Don't quote me. I'm live, so you can quote me now. But for the evaluative questions, they really do depend on writing an essay as such. The slides which I gave you earlier are ones I've used myself, and I use them with all the way from year 7 right up to year 11, and I just kept coming back to them and showing those highlighted sections so they could really see how the things put together. And I hope as I went through this to give them those key link words. And a lot of this is English, isn't it? I don't know what English departments are teaching them all this. They should be. But hey, TPR does it. So keep using those key words. Of course, as you're teaching it, they'll use them correctly or incorrectly, and they'll have others of their own. And you may have a whole bank of other questions, key words, but give them a few and get them to use them frequently. Yes, and the answer is keep on teaching structure. Keep on. You can't do it too many times.
Lovely. Okay, so the next question just says, I've got here, how do I avoid students trying to memorize set answers? Really think what a good question.
Well, I thought, no, I can't say bribery, can I? Not really, no. I'm surprised that you want to do that. I think one of the key things to say to them is this, that there are no, there's no mark scheme that says if you leave something out, I know this, having taught for many years, they think, oh, if I leave something out, then I won't get the marks. Well, it doesn't work like that. You may leave it out, but you may have said something else instead. That's why those timings are so important. I mean, how much can you really write in 6 minutes? Well, probably quite a lot for some people. So it's not the quantity, it's quality, and to be really brave about thinking, look, there are no set answers. Therefore, what I write needs to be what I know, but written well. And especially in understanding answers, have I developed that answer? So I can't do everything, but I've developed that well. So development's really important. And in evaluation answers, think of my own examples. I'm thinking a bit on my feet. I don't know whether that's answered your question. The person who's asked that, but I think you're obviously a good teacher, and just keep going at them and giving them confidence to go solo.
Yeah, actually, I'm just. I might answer an aside renegade question with that, which is that one of the things I know that both in your subject and my former subject we're really keen to do is actually say to the pupils, we want you to revise and know and understand lots and lots of topics, but when we get there on the day, we'd love you to be able to feel confident enough to give your interpretation of that question. And so I suppose my sort of extra question to that was, as an experienced teacher, do you have any strategies for helping young people do that, to kind of have that sense of bravery, so that as teachers we can empower them to go, I'm being asked a question today, and actually, do you know what? I recall something I learned about Judaism and maybe about Islam, and I'm going to write that today, rather than focusing, when they're revising at home on their own, the temptation actually to revise those bullet points, to try and cram in everything that and I know that you've written this specification so carefully for us to move away from that and help encourage students to think and respond. Do you have a strategy in class for trying to get pupils to be brave?
Yes.
Putting you on the spot, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because I was reading about this an interview with I think it was an actor or something. It was a writer, that's right. who said it was actually at school, his English teacher had said to him, you know, you're really very imaginative. And that was it. Your writing is imaginative. It may not have been brilliant, but sometimes as teachers, what we do is we state what we see as potentials. It's a bit risky, I know, and I've done it many times, but I'd have to say, well, as far as I know, no people's told me to the contrary yet, that it usually has paid off because they think, oh, I can do it. And that's all you're doing. You're giving a bit of confidence. Also point out to them what is good. Don't just say generalize things like, oh, that was good. This bit was good, and show them why that really worked. And of course, conversely, why not if it didn't work so well. But if we're talking about building up confidence, it's no good writing an essay, this could be better. So what? You've actually got to say, this bit here was not so good, and what you could have done was this bit. And that takes longer, of course. And the other thing I've often found is actually pupils are quite generous to each other, strangely. If you give them essays of each other to discuss, they often say very nice things, and that's also supportive as well.
Yeah, no, peer learning. That's a really, really good point. I like that. Thank you. And for indulging my question in the meantime. Question 4. Oh, so this one is plugging a little bit and moving into what you might be discussing next time. But
yes.
As a flavour, what do you find to be the most interesting or underrated way of looking at gender through religion? That's a tricky one.
Right. So the question is, what do I find to be the best or the most under?
Yes, the most, what does it say here? Bear with me. The most interesting or underrated way of looking at gender through religion.
Well, do you know, I'm going to start off with one answer, which is that the Bible often gets a bad press on gender. But one of the things I think the Bible does is it really makes us struggle with some of these issues. So, for instance, I'm preparing a little talk on Thursday morning, and the lectionary text is on the book of Esther. And on last Sunday with my youth group, we were looking at the book of Ruth. Now we've got to remember that these texts are written, 2,500 years ago, if not more. So to understand context and understand in the context the social conditions and to put it fully into its socio-historical setting, and then to get the text and say, well, do I like the text? I asked one of my youth group, what questions would you ask Ruth? And I thought that it produced some really fascinating questions. So that is for me the most interesting. How do we respond to gender from a previous era, and does it still speak to us? Can we have a dialogue through it?
I love that.
And maybe that's why we think it's underrated. And sometimes I think our danger is that we stereotype. In the past it was all whatever it was, and often it is the case. But again, if we just go back to the Bible, let's look at King David and his whole affair with Bathsheba. He doesn't come out well out of it at all. So is that what we're supposed to be reading? So that's one area I think is really interesting. I think another really interesting, I'm particularly interested at the moment, is how does an ancient tradition, if it's Judaism or Christianity or Islam or Hinduism, how far is it allowed to buy into the present culture, or how much can it challenge it in terms of gender? And that's not just a purely academic one. Now that I sort of moved sideways and I have a congregation to look after, we've been discussing all this, and people have said, well, why should I suddenly give up what I've believed for the last 40, 50, 60 years? Am I just doing it because it's trendy? So that's another way of understanding, what do we read? And because even the notion of gender at the moment is questioned, and there are many paradoxes. I might mention a very good book I've been reading on this in my next session. I'm not going to tell you what it is. I'll reserve that for next time.
Well, I'm sure. But that sounds very exciting. We'd love to hear it. Yeah, because, I know that when we did some of these sessions last year, and some of the questions from teachers, and I think that's why what you're going to do next time is going to be so helpful, is that lots of teachers said, how do I teach this subject particularly, given, what appears to be maybe a conflicting message of having a Christian ethos as a school, but also wanting to ensure that we were being fair in terms of trans issues and homosexual issues and all of the LGBTQ plus. So I know I don't want to wander into what you're discussing next time at all, but I wondered if you had any sort of comments to make on that, which is, how do you, when you're questioned about this, from your congregation or in youth groups, how do you start to address this narrative, particularly around gender and LGBTQ plus issues?
I think the first of all is to respect the person who's asking the question. That's a very simple one. And I think, unfortunately, with a lot of our sort of woke culture, it's actually judging you before you even opened your mouth. And I think TPR and indeed my whole way of looking at things is to say what's on your mind, express it clearly. How can I help you articulate that? And then what other ways of understanding it? And why do you think other people think differently? So I think there has to be a sense of confidence that what you say is valuable. And you may have very good reasons for holding that view. I think to judge people even before they finish the sentence, as it were, makes them feel, you become very defensive. And also it's undermining that person's value system as well. So it's complex is the answer. But I think one of mutual understanding is really important.
Yeah, thank you. So we have another question here, which is a good one. What do you find to be the most common challenge in teaching TPR at common entrance level?
I think one of it might be getting into the mindset, especially if you're looking at a religion outside your own tradition, or just because it's religion as a whole. That's probably a common challenge. Or it's really interesting how things have changed over my teaching career. When I first started to teach, it used to be the lone atheist in the classroom who got all the ridicule. And now, if anything, it's the other way around. The person who does have a religious belief, and the others think, well, that's all pretty ridiculous. And this is a sign of our own culture. It's also a sign of their own parents as well. And I think it's encouraging people simply to understand that these are deeply held views by millions of people over a very long time, and that understanding them is understanding human culture and civilization. So I think that's one of the most challenging ones. And how do I cope with it? Well, I think we come back to the same ones. It has to come from you as the teacher to say that these are important to you. That's not saying that you believe them necessarily, but they are important in the way that you understand how we should operate as human beings.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Next question is, have you ever sourced examples or discussion points from popular culture?
Yes, frequently. A preview of my sermon, Julia, for Sunday is on the film Don't Look Up, which came out.
Brilliant.
Have you seen it?
I have. I watched that over Christmas.
It's a Marmite film. You either like it or you don't. Now, a bit difficult to use for junior years simply because the language is a bit ripe in places. But there are plenty of films, videos, stories, novels from popular culture, which help illustrate what we're doing. And I think, that just goes to show what I was saying before. This is understanding our culture. And quite often, popular culture has deeply religious and philosophical ideas, maybe not very well expressed, but it's there nevertheless, and you can use that. So yes, I strongly encourage that you to do that. If you want examples, I've given you one. but there are lots more.
No, fantastic. Thank you. We've got a brilliant one. I am new to being head of TPR this year and the only teacher in the school teaching CE 13 plus TPR. I'd love to know, are there any sample answers for past paper exam questions? As I feel the mark scheme, they're very helpful, might be subjective.
Well, there are no mark schemes as such on the new TPR. There's only levels of response, so I'm not sure. I've just given you the example of the exam practice and answers book, the EPQ one. So I would strongly suggest you can have a look at that. And I gave my example of using some of the questions and answers in that book. They're not meant to be model answers, they're meant to be examples of how one might answer. Two of us wrote it, so you probably spot there are slightly stylistically different ways of how we've each approached it. So if that person is not sure about it, perhaps they can just ping me an email afterwards and I'll have further discussion with them.
Lovely. Yes, for anybody that feels that they'd like to ask us any further questions, or if there's anything we haven't addressed, inquiries at iseb.co.uk. So that's inquiries at iseb.co.uk. Lots of us all monitor that to make sure you guys get answers to your questions as soon as possible. And we always make sure we ask our experts. It doesn't just come from us. So yes, if you've got any further questions, do drop us an email too. We have another question here. Well, here we go. We can plug our IPQ. Can we do project-based work in TPR? So this is from somebody where their school now does humanities and TPR is part of that. And so they wondered if there's anything we could do with TPR and setting a project for, I believe, year 7 and 8.
Well, there's a simple answer, and the answer is yes. I mean, there's so much scope there for you for that person to pick up on any elements of those, do a philosophy, research-based project on a particular person or idea. I mean, I'm going to be talking more about going off the spec in the next session, but that might spark off some more ideas. Or, I mean, in the old days, we used to have coursework, but we don't anymore. And then wait, this replaces it.
Yes.
So project-based work on going to your local mosque or going to the Sikh community for carrying out some interviews or doing lots of field work. There's all sorts of things. And actually, Julia, maybe I can put some suggestions together on that. But again, if that person would like to contact me via inquiry, then I'm very happy to discuss that further.
Oh, thank you, Michael. Yes, I mean, we do have a project-based qualification. So for anybody that would either like to do more, it could be a brilliant way of doing some essay practice or some more inquiry-based work, which is what we're really interested in. It's also a lovely way as schools are looking towards either sort of humanities or project-based learning. It's quite a good way to do that. There will be more on our website. We are updating the IPQ. And yes, I really like your idea, Michael, that perhaps we could put together some proposed projects or inquiry-based topics that people might want to explore. I think just there, in and of itself, those are some brilliant ideas. So I think we have, I'm just having a quick look here. I've got no more questions coming through on here or on YouTube. So what I will do is, just in case any of you in the audience this evening would like to pose a question, I shall just round off and then come back to the chat function here. Firstly, of course, to say thank you so much, Michael, as ever, not only for being our lead setter in TPR, but being able to come up with so many practical tips and ways to help us think about our teaching and inspire us. Michael will be running another and an extended TPR session in June. You can log in for that and you can register for that through Eventbrite in exactly the same way you did to get access to this session this evening. There is an early bird discount on it, so do go there. Michael's going to be covering EDI. Equity, diversity and inclusion. He's going to particularly look at feminist and gender interpretations, but I know as well that he will be exploring other issues and also looking at answering any questions that you have and giving you some ideas for how you might be planning year 2 or another year of study in CE. So do join us for that. We can't wait to see you. And we do have, here's another question. Final one, Michael. Oh, I love this. Have you had a conversation with a student that you found eye-opening or has stuck with you over the years? What a lovely way to end. Michael?
Yes, I mean, most teachers do, I hope, especially teaching TPR. And often it comes from an unexpected or simple question. I suppose you want me to try and recall one.
I'd love to hear it.
Well, it's one that you don't always know how much it struck you, and perhaps till later when I had a pupil I taught 25 years ago who rang up not so long ago and reminded me of the conversation we'd had at A level, which has stuck with him. And when I thought back on it, it was a really important one because, and this is what's really important, not for academic reasons, but because it changed the way they'd understand themselves and their world. That does sound rather grand, doesn't it?
It sounds brilliant.
Very much sometimes. But he'd come back to what had happened was he'd had a sort of tragic event in the family, and the conversation we had helped him to reconcile himself. I won't go into details, but and when I thought back on it, it was an important one. Yes.
Well, it's wonderful. I think, and that's what perhaps, I don't know, you might be able to tell us. You know, in your position as a theology, philosophy, and religion teacher, and also I think as a reverend, you are probably privileged to parts, you know, a trust from some of your pupils through the subject that you teach that is I think puts you and all of those teachers on this session this evening in quite a unique position. So thank you so much. Thank you to everybody for joining us this evening. We will be sending out the recording of this to those of you that have logged in, or to those of you that have logged in and perhaps, as I know happened to some of our teachers last night, we've got called off to the boarding house and missed the end. You will get a recording of this for registering, so you won't miss any of the wonderful things that Michael has had to say. We really hope that you will join us again in June, where I think we're opening up a huge, wide, diverse range of topics for TPR that's really going to show all of you how you can extend that syllabus into cross-curricular learning, into talking about equity, diversity and inclusion. And I know that there are some really interesting topics and questions coming up in our assessments moving forward, because we know what a wide-ranging and exciting subject TPR can be. So thank you, Michael. We shall see you again in a couple of months, and thanks to everybody that's tuned in this evening. We shall see you again soon.
Thank you, Julia.